The rain wasn't just falling, it was trying to erase the city. And in that chaos, a man in a blue uniform saw the one thing that shouldn't have been there. A little girl, alone in a pink dress, crying for a father she couldn't find. What he did next was an instinct any decent person would follow. But he had no idea her father was watching from the penthouse above, the billionaire who signed his paycheck. That man was Marcus Johnson. For 22 years, he'd cleaned the silent, gleaming floors of the Apex Tower, invisible to the executives 40 stories above. Tonight, his simple act of sheltering a child from the storm would unknowingly bridge the widest gap in that building, the one between the penthouse and the ground floor. But what happens when a rescue performed in secret becomes the most witnessed moment of your life? To understand the collision about to happen, you need to see the two worlds inside Apex Tower. One existed in the humming, fluorescent-lit basements before dawn, the other in the soundproof silence 40 stories up. For years, their only connection was the occasional elevator ding, a brief, wordless passing of one man going up, another going down. Marcus Johnson started his shift at 4 a.m. when the city was still dark. His routine was a study in quiet efficiency. Empty the bins on the executive floor, polish the granite in the lobby bathrooms, buff the endless hallways until they shone under the recessed lights, a pristine stage set for people who wouldn't notice the effort, only the absence of dust. He'd been doing it for 22 years, first at the old bank building that stood here, then for the construction crew that tore it down, and finally for the sleek glass monument that replaced it. He knew every squeaky floor tile, every stubborn stain, every hiding place where the building's newness gave way to its hidden, grumbling mechanics. He was a fixture, part of the background architecture. The executives in their tailored suits knew his face, maybe nodded, but never his name. His world was measured in supply closets, minimum wage raises that never caught up to rent, and the careful budgeting that stretched a single income to cover his daughter's college textbooks back in Ohio. He sent money home every month. The blue uniform was his armor and his cage. 40 floors above him, in a penthouse that occupied the entire top level, Robert Vance was waking to a different set of calculations. As founder and CEO of Vance Capital, his world was measured in quarterly earnings calls, merger valuations, and a net worth that hovered around $1.2 billion. The Apex Tower wasn't just his office. It was a monument to his life's work, a physical manifestation of the climb from a cramped Brooklyn apartment to this dizzying height. But the view came with a profound, aching silence. His wife, Eleanor, had passed away 2 years prior after a sudden, brutal illness. The penthouse, designed for lavish entertaining, now felt cavernous. His grief was a private ledger, a debt that no amount of capital could settle. The only light in that vast space was his 6-year-old daughter, Chloe. She was the heir to everything he'd built, and the one person he felt he was failing, trapped as he was between boardroom battles and a loneliness he didn't know how to articulate. On the day the storm hit, these two parallel lines began to curve toward each other under the pressure of simple, human fallibility. The National Weather Service had issued a severe thunderstorm warning for the metropolitan area, predicting winds over 60 miles per hour and torrential rainfall. For Marcus, it meant a longer, wetter bus commute. For Robert Vance, it was a logistical nuisance, a risk that his driver would navigate. He had a critical after-hours negotiation call with investors in Singapore, scheduled for 7 p.m. His usual nanny, Maria, had called in sick with the flu. In a pinch, he'd asked his junior assistant, a 23-year-old named Ben, to stay with Chloe in the penthouse's media room during the call. It was a breach of protocol, a small chaos invading his ordered world. Marcus began his evening shift at 5 p.m., the sky already a bruised purple. He could feel the pressure drop in his ears. The building's management had sent a memo, essential staff only. The grand lobby was deserted, the usual buzz of Chinese letter replaced by the nervous tap of rain against the floor-to-ceiling windows. His task was to secure the common areas on the ground floor, checking for leaks, moving furniture away from windows. It was mundane until it was. Up in the penthouse, Robert Vance was sequestered in his study, his focus locked on the complex merger terms flashing on his monitor. Ben, the assistant, was out of his depth. Chloe, bored by the cartoons he'd put on, had wandered from the media room into the sprawling living area. She was drawn to the windows, to the terrifying, beautiful spectacle of the storm. A sudden, apocalyptic crack of thunder shook the very building. The lights in the penthouse flickered. In that moment of startled darkness, a security system on a backup battery emitted a sharp, high-pitched beep. It was a harmless alarm for a secondary power transfer, but to a 6-year-old, it was a sound of pure panic. Chloe did what any frightened child would do. She ran. She bolted from the penthouse, out into the private elevator foyer. The dedicated elevator required a keycard, but in the commotion of the storm preparations, the service door to the main stairwell had been left slightly ajar for a facilities check. A sliver of light from the emergency exit sign. She pushed through. Meanwhile, Marcus was finishing up in the lobby. The main power blinked once, then held. The building's generator kicked in with a distant rumble. He decided to do one last check of the exterior plaza, a concrete expanse now being lashed by horizontal rain. He zipped his thin company jacket to his chin, took a deep breath, and pushed through the heavy rotating door. The wind immediately tried to steal it from his hands. The rain felt like pebbles. He squinted, scanning the flooded plaza for any loose furniture or hazards. That's when he saw it. A flash of pink, a small shape huddled against the brutalist sculpture in the center of the square. At first, he thought it was a discarded bundle of towels. Then it moved. He ran. His work shoes slipped on the wet pavement. The wind tore at his clothes. When he reached the sculpture, he found her. A little girl, soaked to the bone, her pink dress plastered to her skin, her curly hair a wild, wet tangle. She was shivering violently, her cries swallowed by the roar of the storm. Her eyes were wide with a terror that had nothing to do with the weather. She was lost in every sense of the word. Marcus didn't hesitate. He didn't think about liability or protocol or the fact that he was just a janitor. He knelt, blocking the wind with his body. "Hey now," he said, his voice calm, a stark contrast to the chaos. "You're okay. You're not alone." He unzipped his own soaked jacket, wrapped it around her small shoulders, and scooped her up. She was light, clinging to his neck with a desperate strength. He turned his back to the stinging rain and began the clumsy sprint back toward the glowing beacon of the lobby doors. 40 stories above, Robert Vance's call had just concluded. He rubbed his eyes, the tension of the deal beginning to seep away. He walked out of his study, expecting to find Chloe and Ben in the media room. Instead, he found a pale, stammering assistant. "Mr. Vance, she was here just a second ago. The thunder, the alarm, I looked away for a minute." A cold, primal fear seized Robert Vance, a feeling more terrifying than any market crash. He rushed to the panoramic windows, scanning the dark, chaotic plaza below. His eyes, trained to pick out details in complex financial charts, found the movement instantly. A man in a blue uniform, carrying a small, pink-clad bundle, fighting his way toward the building's entrance. His daughter was safe, but the man who held her had no idea that the most powerful man in the city was now watching his every step, his heart hammering against his ribs, his billionaire's illusion of total control shattered in an instant. The rescue was over. The real story was just beginning. Back inside the roaring silence of the lobby, Marcus Johnson's mind wasn't on the billionaire in the sky. It was on the shivering child in his arms. He moved on pure, uncomplicated instinct, the same one that made him check on elderly neighbors during a blackout or help a stranger with a flat tire. He carried Chloe to the security desk, where a stunned guard named Lewis was already on his feet. "Call 911, Marcus said, his voice steady despite his own dripping clothes. "And get some of those paper towels from the closet, the soft ones. And my thermos, it's in my locker, there's still some hot tea in it." He set Chloe gently on the edge of the desk, keeping his jacket wrapped around her. Her crying had subsided into ragged hiccups, her wide eyes fixed on his face. "You're safe now, sweetheart. The storm's outside, we're in here. What's your name?" Chloe, she whispered. "That's a beautiful name, Chloe. I'm Marcus." He took the wad of paper towels Lewis handed him and began gently dabbing her face and hair. "Let's get you dried off a bit. Your dad's probably looking everywhere for you." 40 floors of concrete and steel away, Robert Vance was experiencing a kind of panic that no business school could ever prepare him for. The private elevator seemed to crawl. He had already fired Ben with a single, venomous text. His mind raced with horrific scenarios, each more vivid than the last. When the doors finally opened onto the deserted lobby, the scene that greeted him was both a relief and a profound shock. His daughter was there, alive, wrapped in a stranger's blue uniform jacket. But she wasn't running to him. She was sitting perfectly still, allowing this man, this janitor, to carefully wipe her face. There was a trust in her posture, a calm that starkly contrasted with Robert's own inner earthquake. He crossed the marble floor, his Italian loafers clicking a frantic rhythm. "Chloe, baby," he reached for her. Chloe flinched just slightly and leaned back toward Marcus. It was a tiny motion, but in that moment it felt to Robert like a verdict. Marcus immediately stepped back, creating space. "She's okay, sir. Just cold and scared. We've called for an ambulance just to be safe." Robert gathered Chloe into his arms, holding her tightly, feeling the dampness of the stranger's jacket. The gratitude was instant and overwhelming, but it was tangled with a corrosive sense of shame. He had failed. His money, his power, his fortress of an office, none of it had protected his child. This man, whose name he didn't know, who he passed without seeing most days, had done what he could not. "Thank you," Robert said, the words feeling utterly inadequate. "I don't know how to thank you. What's your name?" "Marcus Johnson, sir. I work in facilities." Marcus. Robert Vance, a man who commanded boardrooms, found himself struggling for what to say next. The wail of an ambulance approached outside. "I'm Robert Vance. This is my daughter." "I figured, sir," Marcus said with a quiet nod. He was already retreating into his professional shell, the moment of crisis over. "The EMTs will take good care of her." The next hour was a blur of flashing lights, polite questions from paramedics, and the overwhelming urge for Robert to fix the situation immediately. Chloe was checked, declared chilled but physically unharmed and wrapped in a foil blanket. Robert gave a statement to the building security chief, his voice clipped, his anger at the situation now directed inward. Throughout it all, he watched Marcus. The janitor gave his own brief statement, declined medical attention, and then simply went back to work, mopping up the puddles of rainwater they'd tracked in, returning the lobby to its pristine, impersonal state. That night in the penthouse, after Chloe was finally asleep in her dry, warm bed, Robert Vance sat alone in his study. The silence was back, but now it was accusatory. On his computer screen, with a few keystrokes, he pulled up the employee record for Marcus Johnson. The file was sparse. Date of hire, 22 years ago. Position, custodial lead. Salary, a number so low it made Robert blink. He scrolled further. Emergency contact, Danielle Johnson, daughter. Address, an apartment in a neighborhood Robert had only ever driven through. He leaned back, staring at the city lights. This man lived on less than 2 weeks of his own golf club dues. He had saved Chloe without a second thought. The dissonance was staggering. Robert's mind, trained in transactional logic, immediately sought a solution. A bonus, a promotion, a check that would balance the scales and allow him to file this terrifying episode away. The next morning, Marcus arrived for his 4 a.m. shift as usual. The storm had passed, leaving the city washed clean. He was emptying trash bins on the executive floor when the head of building management, a man named Carl, found him. Carl looked uncomfortable. "Johnson, Mr. Vance wants to see you. In his office. Now." A summons to the penthouse was unheard of. For a janitor, it usually meant one thing: you were being fired. Marcus felt a cold knot form in his stomach. Had he broken a rule? Used the wrong entrance? He rode the service elevator up in silence, his blue uniform suddenly feeling like a costume. Robert Vance's personal assistant ushered him into an office that was larger than Marcus's entire apartment. The view was breathtaking, a kingdom laid out below. Robert stood by the window, then turned. He didn't look like a furious boss. He looked tired and strangely uncertain. "Marcus, please sit." Robert gestured to a chair worth more than Marcus's car. "I'm fine standing, sir." Robert nodded, accepting the boundary. "What you did last night, there's no adequate way to thank you. You saved my daughter. You showed more presence of mind and compassion than people I pay six-figure salaries to." He picked up an envelope from his desk. "This is a gesture of my gratitude. It's a bonus, separate from your salary. And I've instructed Carl to promote you to facilities supervisor with a 20% raise." He held out the envelope. Marcus looked at it, then at Robert's face. He didn't reach for it. The silence stretched. "It wasn't a job, Mr. Vance," Marcus said finally, his voice quiet but firm. "It was a little girl in the rain. Anybody would have done it." "But nobody else did," Robert countered, the envelope still suspended between them. "Please take it. Use it for your daughter's education, for whatever you need." Marcus thought of Danielle's student loans. He thought of his leaky roof. The weight of that envelope could lift so many burdens, but a deeper, stubborn pride held him back. This felt like payment, like the incident was being converted into a business transaction, neat and clean. His act of basic humanity was being given a price tag, and the number, however large, felt like it would cheapen it. "I appreciate the thought, sir, truly," Marcus said, "but I can't accept that. I was just doing what was right." He saw the confusion and maybe a flicker of offense in Robert's eyes. The billionaire was not used to having his solutions refused. "The promotion, if it's based on my work, I'll accept it, but not because of last night." Robert slowly lowered the envelope. He was baffled. In his world, every problem had a financial solution. Every service had a fee. This refusal was a language he didn't speak. "I don't understand," he admitted, a rare moment of vulnerability. "Maybe there's nothing to understand, sir," Marcus said. "Can I get back to my shift?" Robert just nodded, watching as Marcus Johnson turned and left the office, closing the door softly behind him. The envelope sat on the polished desk, a monument to a failed transaction. For the first time, Robert Vance wondered if the currency he'd spent his life accumulating was worthless in the economy that actually mattered. Downstairs, the rumor mill was already churning. A janitor summoned to the penthouse. The story of the rescue, embellished with each telling, was spreading through the security team, the kitchen staff, the other custodians. By lunchtime, people were looking at Marcus differently, some with respect, others with a strange, wary curiosity. His supervisor, a man who had never given him a second glance, clapped him on the back too hard. "Way to go, Johnson. Maybe you'll get us all a raise." The comment felt like a violation. Marcus just wanted to disappear back into the walls. He didn't want to be the hero janitor. He wanted to be invisible again. But the universe had other plans, because someone else had been watching from a different window that stormy night. A freelance journalist living in the apartment building across the plaza, who had filmed the entire rescue on his phone through the rain-streaked glass. He'd captured the haunting, powerful image. A small figure in pink, the man in blue fighting through the gale to reach her, the tender moment of pickup, the determined carry to safety. The journalist sold the video to a local news station. That evening, it led the broadcast. The anchor's voice was dripping with sentiment. In the midst of Tuesday's terrifying storm, a heartwarming act of heroism, a building custodian braves the elements to rescue a lost little girl right here in the heart of the financial district. The video played, clear and dramatic. They didn't name Marcus, citing privacy, but they did name the building, the iconic Apex Tower. And then, in a live interview from his penthouse, looking solemn and grateful, was Robert Vance. "I owe that man everything," he told the camera, his voice thick with emotion. "He is a true hero. While I was working, he was saving what matters most." He spoke about the importance of everyday heroes of community. It was a perfect, PR-friendly soundbite. Marcus saw it on the break room TV. He felt a hot wave of nausea. His private act was now public property. His face was blurred in the video, but anyone who worked in the building would know. And Robert Vance was up there, framing the narrative, turning it into a feel-good story that somehow still centered the powerful father's redemption. The next day, a formal letter arrived at Marcus's apartment, not from Vance, but from the corporate legal department of Apex Tower Properties. It was cold, legalistic, and cut through him like a knife. It acknowledged the recent incident and commended his commendable actions. However, it sternly reminded him of company policy regarding unauthorized interaction with members of the public on building premises and the significant liability risk incurred by leaving his assigned post during a severe weather event. It was a warning, couched in praise, a threat disguised as a thank you note. The message was clear. You saved a child, but you broke our rules. Do not expect this to become a habit. The institutional machine, designed to minimize risk and protect capital, had smoothly rolled over the human act at its center. The hero narrative for the public, the disciplinary warning for the employee. Marcus sat at his kitchen table, the letter in his hands, realizing the true cost of his kindness wasn't something Robert Vance could ever write a check for. He was now trapped in a story he never wanted to be in, watched by a boss who couldn't understand him, and punished by a system that saw his compassion as a compliance issue. And he had no idea that the man in the penthouse, watching that same news clip, had just received a piece of information that would change everything between them forever. The information that landed on Robert Vance's desk wasn't another merger proposal. It was the internal memo from his legal department, CC'd to building management, detailing the policy reminder issued to employee 7342 Marcus Johnson. He read it once, then again, his face hardening into a mask of cold fury. They had thanked the man publicly and threatened him privately, in his own company, using his own resources. He summoned the head of legal, a stern woman named Amanda Bishop, to his office. He didn't offer her a seat. He simply slid the printed memo across the desk. Explain this. Amanda didn't flinch. It's standard risk mitigation procedure, Robert. An employee left his assigned post during a declared severe weather event, engaged with a minor without proper authorization, and created a significant liability exposure for the company. The commendation in the letter is the gratitude. The policy reminder is the necessary corrective action to prevent future improvisation. Improvisation. Robert repeated the word as if it were a foreign toxin. He saved a child, my child. And we are grateful, Amanda said, her tone professionally smooth. But we cannot have staff believing they can ignore safety protocols based on personal judgment. What if he'd slipped on the plaza and been seriously injured? What if the child had been injured during his rescue attempt? The workers' compensation and civil litigation exposure would be enormous. The letter is a shield for the company. Robert stared at her. He understood the logic. It was the same cold, risk-averse calculus he used to evaluate underperforming assets. But for the first time, he was on the other side of the equation. Marcus Johnson wasn't an asset. He was the man who had done the right thing while his own system prepared to punish him for it. Get out, Robert said quietly. Robert, I must advise. Get out, and tell Carl in building management that any further communication with Marcus Johnson goes through me directly. Alone again, Robert felt a profound disconnect. He had built this efficient, self-protecting machine. Now it was operating exactly as designed, and it disgusted him. He needed to see beyond the employee file. He called his most discreet private investigator, a man named Silas. I need a background check, not the corporate kind, the human kind, on Marcus Johnson. Everything, but quietly. Meanwhile, the ground floor was simmering. The leaked news of the disciplinary letter had spread among the custodial and security staff like a gas leak. The hero narrative curdled into one of bitter solidarity. Marcus's coworkers, who had initially teased him, now offered muttered words of support and shared stories of their own encounters with the building's inflexible bureaucracy. Marcus became a symbol, unwillingly, of the quiet war between the people who kept the building running and the invisible powers that set the rules. He tried to keep his head down, but the promotion Robert had insisted on made it impossible. He was now supervising teams, attending management meetings where he was the only person in a uniform. The other supervisors spoke a language of metrics and efficiencies he didn't fully share. He saw the human cost of every optimization: fewer cleaners for more floors, cheaper supplies that caused rashes on hands, the elimination of the overnight security desk to save on wages. He saw the memos from Amanda Bishop's department that framed every human need as a liability. One evening, a week after the letter, he was auditing the supply closet on the executive floor when he overheard two junior VPs talking in the hallway. "Absolute PR nightmare waiting to happen. Vance is lucky the guy didn't take the money and run to the press," one said. "Please," the other laughed. "That janitor, what's he going to say? Billionaire offered me life-changing money, I said no. He's probably regretting it now, cleaning toilets for a living." Marcus stood frozen, a box of trash bags in his hands. The words didn't hurt as much as the casual, unthinking cruelty of them. They confirmed his deepest fear. His refusal had been interpreted as stupidity, not principle. He was a curious anecdote in their world, not a person. The private investigator's report landed on Robert's desk 2 days later. It was concise, factual, and devastating. Marcus Johnson, 51 years old, widowed for 8 years following his wife's battle with cancer, medical debt from that period still lingering. One daughter, Danielle, a senior at Ohio State University studying civil engineering. Academic scholarship, but significant student loan debt for living expenses. Marcus sent her $400 every month without fail. He lived in a rent-controlled apartment in a building slated for potential revitalization. His credit score was low, not from irresponsibility, but from the long-term strain of single-income parenting and medical bills. His most notable trait, according to a neighbor's interview, was that he fixed everyone's minor appliances for free and checked on the elderly lady downstairs during heat waves. Robert closed the folder. The abstract employee had dissolved, replaced by a man of quiet dignity and relentless burden. The bonus he'd offered was a rounding error to Robert, but it could have erased years of struggle for Marcus. And Marcus had refused it. Not out of pride, Robert now understood, but out of a need to keep one thing in his life: that act of rescue, untainted by the very system that created the need for it in the first place. He had to make this right, but the legal letter had poisoned the well. A direct approach would seem like another transaction, or worse, pity. He needed to understand the world Marcus operated in. So Robert Vance did something he hadn't done in 20 years. He walked the building. Not the executive suites, but the back corridors, the basement loading docks, the cramped break room with its broken microwave and faded safety posters. He went at 4 in the morning, dressed casually, and just watched. He saw the quiet ballet of the pre-dawn shift. He saw Marcus, not as a hero or a problem, but as a skilled professional. He watched him calmly train a new hire on the buffer, his instructions patient and clear. He saw him notice a flickering light in a stairwell and immediately radio maintenance, preventing a potential hazard. He saw the respectful nods he received from every security guard and kitchen porter. This man wasn't just cleaning floors. He was the connective tissue of the building's ecosystem, a leader without a title. Robert also saw the friction points. The exasperated look from a cleaner who found yet another executive conference room left in a state of post-meeting chaos, with discarded coffee cups and expensive catered sandwiches half-eaten and thrown away. He heard a security guard grumble about the new, cost-saving directive that left the west entrance unsupervised for 2 hours each night. He was seeing the real cost of the efficiencies his board celebrated. The breaking point came from an unexpected direction: Chloe. She had been drawing pictures nonstop since the storm, Pictures of a big building, a scary sky, and a man in blue. In one held up for her father to see, the man in blue was handing a tiny girl in a pink dress a shining star. At the bottom, in wobbly letters, she had written, MARCUSMYFRIEND. She asked about him constantly. Does Marcus have a little girl? Does he like cookies? Can we say thank you again? Her simple, persistent questions were a mirror, reflecting Robert's own failure back at him. His daughter's hero was being treated like a potential lawsuit by his company. The dissonance was no longer just intellectual, it was emotional, lived in the eyes of his child. He decided to bypass the system entirely. He waited until he knew Marcus's shift had ended and he went to his apartment building. He didn't take the corporate limo. He took a taxi, feeling strangely exposed. He stood outside the modest, slightly crumbling building, the envelope with the bonus check in his pocket feeling like a lead weight. This was a mistake. He was about to leave when the front door opened and Marcus walked out, carrying a bag of garbage. They stared at each other, both frozen in the dim light of the entryway. The billionaire in a cashmere overcoat, the janitor in a worn flannel shirt. The hierarchy of the tower was meaningless here. "Mr. Vance," Marcus said, his voice guarded. "Marcus, I was in the neighborhood." The lie was pathetic and they both knew it. Marcus nodded slowly, then walked past him to dump the bag in the bin. He turned back. "If this is about the letter, sir, don't worry. I got the message." "That's what I'm here about," Robert said, the words rushing out. "The letter was wrong. It was sent without my knowledge. I've dealt with it." Marcus studied him, his expression unreadable. "You dealt with it, okay." He made to go back inside. "My daughter draws pictures of you," Robert said, the statement stopping Marcus in his tracks. "She calls you her friend. She wants to know if you like cookies." A faint, almost imperceptible softening touched Marcus's eyes. "Chloe's a sweet kid." "She is, and I am deeply sorry, Marcus. Not just for the legal nonsense, for the offer. It was the wrong currency. I didn't understand that until he trailed off, gesturing vaguely at the space between them, at the whole neighborhood. "I'm trying to understand now." Marcus leaned against the brick wall, crossing his arms. He was silent for a long moment. "You want to understand, Mr. Vance, that letter wasn't the worst part. The worst part is that it was right. According to the rules of your building, of your world, what I did was wrong. I left my post. I assumed a risk. I put the company in jeopardy. And following the rules is how I've kept this job for 22 years, how I put my daughter through school. So what does it say that the one time I truly did something right? The rule book says I was wrong." Robert had no answer. The wind whistled through the alleyway. "You see a transaction that didn't close," Marcus continued, his voice low. "I see a world where the right thing and the safe thing are enemies, and guys like me can't afford to pick the right thing very often." He pushed off from the wall. "I appreciate you coming down here, sir, really, but you should go back to your neighborhood." He went inside, leaving Robert Vance standing alone on the sidewalk, the ungiven check burning a hole in his pocket, the man's words echoing in the silence. For the first time, Robert didn't see a problem to be solved. He saw a system to be broken, and he knew with a chilling certainty that the first brick that needed to be pulled out was his own. But before he could even begin, the news story, which had begun to fade, was about to explode back into the spotlight with a force that would threaten everything he'd built. The explosion didn't come from the news. It came from inside the machine itself. 2 days after Robert Vance stood on that sidewalk, an anonymous email, later traced to a disgruntled mid-level manager in the legal department, landed in the inboxes of every major news outlet in the city. Attached was the full, unredacted disciplinary letter sent to Marcus Johnson. The story transformed overnight. The headline was no longer "Billionaire's Daughter Rescued by Hero Janitor." It was "Company Threatens Hero Who Saved CEO's Child." The juxtaposition was damning. The touching rescue video played side by side with stark images of the legal memo's most threatening lines. The narrative of corporate hypocrisy wrote itself. Talking heads debated the morality of modern capitalism. Unions cited it as a textbook case of worker exploitation. Social media erupted. The Apex Tower and Robert Vance personally were at the center of a firestorm. Robert's board of directors was in panic mode. Their emergency conference call was a chorus of damage control. We need to issue a statement distancing the parent company from the building management's error. We should settle with Johnson immediately with a strict NDA. We have to find and fire the leaker. Robert listened in silence for 10 minutes. Then he spoke and his voice cut through the noise. No. A stunned quiet followed. We are not distancing. We are not hiding. That letter came from this company, from a department that reports to me. I read Marcus Johnson's file. For 22 years, his performance reviews have one consistent note: reliable, goes above and beyond. He did exactly that, and we threatened his livelihood for it. The problem isn't the leak. The problem is that we had something that's shameful to leak. He took a breath. I'm calling a press conference for tomorrow. I will read that letter aloud to the public, and then I will announce the restructuring of our entire non-executive compensation and safety policy framework. We're not doing PR. We're doing penance. The board was horrified. It was unprecedented. It was a massive liability admission. Robert didn't care. For the first time in his career, he was acting from a place of moral clarity, not financial calculus. The next morning, Marcus was besieged. Reporters camped outside his apartment. His phone rang incessantly with offers for interviews, book deals, even a TV movie. He ignored them all. He went to work, slipping in through a loading dock. The atmosphere in the building was electric with tension. Then at 10 a.m., every screen in the lobby, every break room monitor, tuned to the live press conference. There, standing at a simple podium with no corporate logo, was Robert Vance. He looked tired, but his gaze was steady. He held up a piece of paper. This is a letter sent by my company to Marcus Johnson, the man who saved my daughter's life. And he read it, word for word. The sterile legal language sounded even crueler in the quiet of his voice. When he finished, he set it down. This letter is correct. According to the policies I approved, Marcus Johnson did break the rules. He left his post. He assumed a personal risk. He interacted with a minor without authorization. By the logic of liability and efficiency that governs our corporate world, this letter is the correct response. He paused, letting the cameras zoom in. But by the logic of human decency, it is a profound failure. It is a failure of my leadership. It is a failure of a system that values rules over people and risk management over basic goodness. He then laid out the Vance Equity Initiative. He didn't run it by the board first. He announced it live, a sweeping overhaul of the parent company's operating principles for all its properties. The minimum wage for any contracted employee, from janitor to security guard, would be raised to $30 an hour, pegged to the local living wage. Comprehensive benefits, including full family health care and a matched retirement plan, would be extended to all, regardless of full-time or contract status. A new office, reporting directly to the CEO, would be established to audit and reform safety protocols, with a mandate that human judgment in emergencies would never be punishable. And every property would establish a joint labor management council, giving frontline staff a direct voice in the policies that govern their work. These changes, Robert concluded, are not a reward for one man's heroism. They are a correction for a system that failed to see his humanity and the humanity of thousands like him for far too long. They are the first step. The business world reeled, shareholders buzzed, but on the ground floor of the Apex Tower, a quiet revolution was happening. People wept. They hugged. For Marcus, watching from a break room, it felt surreal. It wasn't a check. It was a dismantling of the very wall that had separated him from the man in the penthouse. Robert didn't stop there. He personally went to Marcus's apartment that evening without cameras, without an entourage. He asked to come in. They sat at Marcus's small kitchen table. The press conference, that was something, Marcus said, his voice thick with emotion he couldn't quite name. It was the bare minimum, Robert replied. Marcus, the initiatives, they need a director for the Labor Council. Someone who knows the work, who the staff trusts. I can't think of anyone better than you. It would be a full executive position. Salary, stock options, the works. Marcus shook his head slowly, a sad smile on his face. Mr. Vance, Robert, I clean floors. I don't sit in boardrooms. You understand the floors, Robert said, leaning forward. That's what the boardrooms have been missing for decades. I'm not asking you to become one of them. I'm asking you to be the bridge, to translate, to tell us when we're about to send another stupid letter. He saw the hesitation. And, Robert added softly, my daughter has been baking. She made you cookies. She'll be very disappointed if you don't at least try one. Marcus laughed, a real, unguarded sound. He looked around his kitchen, at the life he'd built from quiet endurance. Then he looked at the man who owned the building he cleaned, who was offering him a key to the system. I'll think about it. He did more than think. A week later, he accepted, on one condition, that his first project would be to dismantle the subcontracting layers that kept janitorial and security staff in perpetual precarity, bringing them all in-house with full benefits. Robert agreed immediately. The changes weren't magic. The old guard and management resisted. The initial cost projections were staggering. But Robert Vance, with the relentless focus he once reserved for hostile takeovers, pushed it through. He cited the leaked letter and the PR disaster as the cost of the old way. He framed the new policies as an investment in brand integrity and operational resilience. He was learning to speak the language of the machine to change its purpose. Marcus's transition was jarring. Trading his blue uniform for a suit felt like wearing a costume. The first executive meetings were agonizing, filled with jargon and unspoken rules. But when he spoke, the room went silent. He didn't talk in metrics, he told stories. The story of the cleaner who got a skin rash from the cheap chemical switch. The security guard who worked 3 jobs and still couldn't afford his son's asthma inhaler. He made the abstract human. Slowly, the policies on paper began to translate into real changes. Better equipment, predictable schedules, a genuine open-door policy. The surprising detail, the one few saw coming, was the friendship that grew between the two men. It wasn't born of gratitude or obligation, but of a shared project. Robert would come down to the new community office Marcus set up in the building's basement, now renovated and bright. They'd have coffee. They talked about work, but also about fatherhood, about loss. Robert spoke of Alina. Marcus spoke of his late wife, Angela. They found a common language in their grief and their hopes for their daughters. Chloe became the bridge's constant traffic. She visited Mr. Marcus's office regularly, showing him her drawings. He kept the one with the shining star on his new desk. Through her, Robert saw Marcus not as a project or a symbol, but as a man of profound kindness who fixed things, whether it was a leaky faucet or a broken policy. 1 year to the day after the storm, the Vance Marcus Foundation was launched. It was funded by a significant personal donation from Robert, but co-chaired by both men. Its mission was to provide advocacy and legal support for low-wage workers facing punitive actions for acts of good faith or emergency intervention. The first case they took on was a hospital orderly in another state who had been fired for using a defibrillator on a visitor, outside his strict scope of duties. They won. At the launch gala, Marcus stood to speak. He looked out at the crowd of donors, activists, and former coworkers. "A year ago," he said, "I was carrying a little girl out of the rain. I was just trying to get her warm. I had no idea that single, simple act would start a thaw, not just for her, but for the frozen ways we see each other across floors, across titles, across lives. We spend so much time building walls to protect what we have, we forget that real security is built in the connections between us." Robert watched from the side, his hand on Chloe's shoulder. He had set out to repay a debt and had instead found a partnership that was rebuilding his company's soul. The loneliness of the penthouse had been replaced by the demanding, rewarding noise of a purpose larger than profit. The story of the rescue faded from the headlines. replaced by the harder, longer work of systemic change. But in the apex tower, the connection between the penthouse and the ground floor was now a lived reality, a testament to the idea that sometimes the most powerful act isn't a dramatic rescue, but the decision to truly see the person who performed it and to build a new world from that shared vision. So, what was the real story here? Was it a janitor rescuing a child? Or was it a billionaire finally learning to see the man who'd been right in front of him for 22 years? In the end, it was both. The storm forced a collision, but the choice to build a bridge afterwards is what changed everything. We live in a world meticulously sorted by floors, by job titles, by bank accounts, by the neighborhoods on our driver's licenses. We build towers, both literal and figurative, that allow us to look out without having to look down. The powerful isolate themselves in penthouses of perception, believing their view is the whole city. The essential remain in the foundations, aware of every crack and tremor unseen. Marcus Johnson and Robert Vance's story reminds us that the most dangerous distance in the world isn't measured in miles, but in perceived value. A distance where one man's act of instinctive kindness can be logged by another man's system as a liability. The miracle wasn't that Marcus ran into the rain. It's that, when presented with a chance to fortify his walls, Robert Vance chose to dismantle them instead. This isn't just a tale of gratitude. It's a blueprint for repair. It shows that transformation doesn't begin with grand pronouncements from on high, but with a humble, uncomfortable walk down to the ground floor. It starts when the person with all the power realizes the currency they've hoarded is worthless in the economy of human connection, and has the courage to learn a new language. What echoes after the cameras leave is the quiet work, the policy meetings, the shared coffees, the difficult daily choice to prioritize people over protocols. That's where the true rescue happens, not from a storm, but from the cold machinery of indifference. Look around your own world. Where are the invisible walls? In your office, your community? Are you in the penthouse watching life through tinted glass? Or are you on the ground floor, your essential work taken for granted? And what would it take, what storm, what moment of unexpected connection, to make you see the person on the other side? If this story resonated with you, consider this. Every act of seeing someone, truly seeing them, is a revolutionary act. It's how we melt the invisible barriers that keep us lonely in our separate tiers. We share these stories to remind us of our shared humanity. If you believe in the power of these connections, tap the like button. It helps us find more stories like this one. Share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And we'd love to hear from you. In the comments, tell us, have you ever had a moment that completely shifted how you saw someone you thought you had figured out? Or have you been the one who was finally seen? Thank you for watching, for listening, and for being part of this community that values depth over distraction. Remember, the most profound changes often begin not with a shout from the rooftop, but with a quiet decision in the pouring rain to simply reach out your hand.